We've always considered games as being something that had to be impactful. Thinking of games as an art form is not a given. You have so many constraints and criteria to deal with, so many hurdles that make you not being able to accomplish something other than just like what you only can do. Games are an art form, and we can express things through games that only games can express. Games are much more than many people give it credit for.
The idea of death in games, it's nothing new, and it was nothing new for us. We had a first game which was about a hero's quest to the afterlife, and we had the second game where the hero just never died and would just relive the things over and over again. You could say that as a studio, we're generally death obsessed, right?
The story behind Jotun kind of explores like a humanity in death in which you have to like fight to find your rightful place. Whereas in Sundered, which was the game we did afterwards, we wanted to see what it would mean to take what we did on Jotun and make it dark. Like, how dark could we get and still be able to communicate the experience of death through a side-scroller game, basically? It's a little fatalistic, I guess.
Everyone on the team wants to push our own games further. They want to push their own craft further as much as possible. So looking at, Jotun to Sundered, we knew that our ambitions are kind of always growing. We knew we wanted to make a game that was more impactful and a much more narrative as well with Spiritfarer. It's been quite a wild ride.
Spiritfarer is mostly like an open-ended question. What if we didn't fear death as much?
Spiritfarer was very inspired by Spirited Away and the idea of that hotel for spirits. We very quickly started brainstorming ideas around that, specifically about whether having like a hotel simulator was anything interesting.
Like the whole bathhouse with all of its disorganized components just living together, and having someone who runs around in this big house and trying to figure things out and do chores and take care of people. That was something that really sort of set our minds aflame.
From the broader perspective, we were influenced by Greek mythology with the idea of the river Styx and Charon, who ferries the souls of the dead. The original pitch of the game is, I'd say, pretty close to what it ended up, with one big difference. It was originally on a train instead of a boat. So that was one of the decisions that we made earlier on, just to give us more flexibility, not being stuck on train tracks and having to deal with that from a level design perspective was kind of a nightmare.
In the meantime, we were thinking about the genre of game that we could do with this. We had just come off of Sundered, and Sundered was a Metroidvania, and it was very dark. So we were looking for something a little more lighthearted. So the idea of doing something in sort of like a farm sim genre, a Stardew Valley Harvest Moon thing, was very attractive for us. The idea that eventually came about that this game, that Spiritfarer, would be about dying, but not about killing, and about more coming to terms with death, that it wouldn't just be transporting spirits as Charon does in the Greek mythology. It would be more about helping them come to terms with death. So this sort of came together gradually, but once that did come together, I think the team rallied around it.
I think we really wanted to explore death in another way that we had before in our two previous games. It's very much something that is very meaningful to us. And I think our goal was just to make it an easier conversation, even though it never is easy, but I think it can be better.
This had time to evolve before Nick came on the team, but I'd say the heart and soul that Nick and his team sort of worked into the project, really, we had to wait till he was there to really like have the vision sort of coalesce into something more solid.
So I joined the company after they had released Sundered. I was a fan of their work, to be honest. I was still in AAA back then. Assassin's Creed Origin was the last game I worked on at Ubisoft. Going from AAA to Spiritfarer is both frightening and exhilarating. It's like when I was at Ubisoft, you feel like you're working on a Ferrari, on a very high-end car, and that all you do is just a part of the steering wheel, but it's a very, very nice steering wheel. In Thunder Lotus and many of the indie companies, you feel like you're doing more of a custom-made rally car, and then you get to drive it. It's not as fancy as a Ferrari, but still, it's yours. You can drive it anywhere you want. We do have limits, of course. I mean, we're still going to be making games with teams of 10 to 15 people, so we will never be able to ship games like Horizon Zero Dawn or Assassin's Creed ever. That's a given. But it will be our game. Every person on the project contributes way more significantly to the project than anyone else on AAA.
The question of death and the question of all of these deep and heavy topics were kind of touchy to write. I think we could have very easily fallen in an uncanny, cringy valley or written something in quite bad taste. I think what helped was, well, we had I think a fantastic direction from the creative director, Nick, who has a lot of experience dealing with death.
It is always more complicated to tackle a difficult subject matter. I do remember a very specific moment in my life where I was back to see my family in the south of France, and my beloved grandmother was dying. It was pretty disheartening. Just that person that had such an importance in my life, and to see her basically fading away. And we knew because of the distance we couldn't really be there when she was gonna die. I remember talking to my wife in the car going back to where we lived, and I said, can I really live this, 10 times, 12 times in Spiritfarer? Is that, can I do this? I mean, can we? Are people going to reject that right away? I mean, that's the first departure, the first player that dies, they were going to be, I mean, screw that. I don't want to play that again. It's terrible. It's it makes me cry and I don't want to do it anymore. It just made me realize that, oh man, this is going to be tough. People who are going to play this, is going to be heavy.
Writing for Spiritfarer really had me thinking about, what grief is. We often connect grief with death because it's, it's the big one. It's the big thing, death. But when you think about grief, my own interpretation of it is that grief is a very specific type of loss. And what makes it so special is that it's a loss that's instantly recognizable as a loss you can't ever recover from. And it forces you through this painful but sometimes liberating process of kind of reinventing yourself every time. That might sound harsh and sad, but life is a series of little and small griefs.
But at the same time, the game was meant to be lighthearted and to portray life as a bright thing and not be a terrible drama about people dying. There is a degree of joy that people have, and then death happens. And that's how it is. That roller coaster of emotion is exactly what life is about. I met tons of people who are in end-of-life care facilities and palliative wards in hospitals. My own brother is running a geriatric ward in south of France. Talking to someone who is dying, and that person knows she's dying, and she's got a couple of weeks ahead of her, maybe a couple of days, she doesn't really know, but she knows this is the end. Yet what she does is normal things. She still wakes up, she still brushes her teeth, go to the grocery store, buy some cereals, and fix herself a breakfast. That's what she does. She's not trying to be on the edge of a cliff, proclaiming words written by a poet from years by. It's not happen this way. It just happens in the simplest of ways, in the simplest of context, and life goes on even before life is over. It is both a pretty big deal and not a big deal at all. It's extremely weird.
I'd say early on, we were kind of aware that this was a sensitive subject, but it was a subject that we felt that if we went in with a great respect and a great desire for authenticity, that we would be able to create these characters who were, meaningful for us. I think you can see that in the creative methodology that went around creating those characters. We're taking real stories from people around the dev team, of real people who've had, big impacts on our lives and who've left a mark on us. Most of the characters in Spiritfarer are kind of a mix of a whole bunch of different people within those stories.
Nick sort of spearheaded that and really created a safe space for individually, like not as a team, but individual people who would want to sit down with him and just describe, like, just tell the story of these loved ones that touched them deeply. Eventually, as a team, those stories were sort of modified, but a lot of like big pieces of people's stories would be the main inspiration for some of these characters.
I sent a signal to the whole team and said, look, I really want to have more personal stories. I think our characters can only be real if they're inspired by real events and real people and real persons that you had a connection with. I'd say 5 people came back to me with stories about their relatives who they thought had a pretty big impact on their lives and why and how they died and what did that mean to them, which led to extremely emotional moments, of course, as you can imagine.
He was just there to listen, basically. He was there to learn about the person that had passed on, what their qualities and their flaws were, because one of their goals was to represent someone in their entirety without them being a carbon copy of that person, because obviously we just didn't want to do biographies.
All the names the Nick creates are people who influenced us in a way, but not all of them are a spirit, and not all spirits are inspired by entirely true characters. It's a bit of a mixed bag. I talked about my grandmother earlier. She's the biggest inspiration for the character Astrid, who's Lynx. She's a bit, self-centered. It's pretty fun. She's a good example of how much a character can be inspired by one person.
So basically, my grandma died at the beginning of the production. And so when I talked to him about it, I was very much in the process of coming to term with my grandma's passing. Me sharing that eventually became the character of Alice. She's not my grandma, but she does represent something that was inherent to my grandma and to maybe all the women in my family, which is to say this sort of like willingness to erase yourself for the well-being of someone else. So yeah, there was something extremely cathartic about getting to play a game where I could see this person who touched my life. I got to draw Alice's house. That was also kind of cathartic because it's heavily based on my grandma's house. The color scheme is her living room. Like the wardrobes and all those things, the hats, it's all inspired by her love of clothes and fashion. And in a way, I feel like I got closer to my grandma through making this game. I really hope that I did her justice.
Most of the characters that are inspired by real-life people have a bunch of other things mixed in. They're not representations of them, but they're inspired by our feelings towards them. A good example being Gustav, the old German art curator, being very partly inspired by my own great-grandmother, which was a sculptor.
Gustav was one of the first spirit houses that I ended up sort of working on. We sat down and he ended up like sort of going through what kind of, the whole life of his great grandmother and what kind of person she was. And I could tell that she had such a deep and profound love for like visual communication and art. And it's like, okay, well, I have to do justice to that person now. I have to get across that this person had a passion for design and aesthetic through my own use of the medium, right? And that's extremely cool.
But the character is also inspired by my own relationship to art. And it's kind of me poking fun at myself for what I might have told at some parties at some point in my life when I didn't know better.
All the other team members, they contributed pretty big time on the project. From whoever you are, you still have something to contribute. That's what makes Spiritfarer even more personal, because to some degree, many of the characters you see in the game are inspired by fathers, uncles, mothers, grandmothers, brothers, friends. It's us there,
It was our first game in which we had such a variety of characters, like such a huge cast. The design of the spirits were not all done after we had like the whole personality figured out. A lot of them were actually done before Nicholas joined us. So we kind of had a list of different like characters, and we're like, how would this one like fit this character? I would say that all of them ended up happily matching the personality. Gwen ended up being someone that was very proud. Her design was done first, but we made it so that she was a very proud character, and that also represented the person she was based on.
To us, it was extremely important to make it feel not just through like the dialogue and the interaction and the gameplay, but also through the visuals that this person was a whole person. Joe gave me Atul's house to sort of finish up. I took that house and I added like, you know, the big shelf with stuff in it and like the little frame with his like union friend and tools. That was such a fun thing to do because I was like, okay, who is Atul? He's the bon vivant, as we say in French, right? He's very Epicurean, but also he cares for his fellow man. He used to be a union leader. It's just like the kind of little things that you get to insert in the houses of your spirit. And that's just as much like character development than the quests themselves.
Spiritfarer's style was kind of a huge journey for us because we had done Jotun and then Sundered, but we were in a very dark place in terms of theme, in terms of mood. It took me a lot of iteration. I went through like a comic book style-ish to something more like gritty, and then we were like, no, we need to like make people feel comforted in talking about death because death is such a scary topic. And that was when I remembered Hiroshi Yoshida, a woodblock painter. I remember like all of his pieces bringing me serenity, and it made me want to visit the place that he painted, kind of like showing them to me through his eyes, which was really fun. The serenity of the landscape and the desire to explore was really something we wanted to communicate through Spiritfarer because we knew we were going to deal with a heavy subject. So we needed to kind of balance it out with something that was wonderful, that would keep you wanting to experience more. Because if we just throw sad death after sad death without ever like recompensing like the player, they're not going to stick around. All the very early tests, I guess, for style all included the ship. It initially included seasons also, but that ended up being way too heavy and impossible to do because it would require essentially 4 different versions of the same level per level. Yeah, the ship was something that we figured out very early, and figuring out how the buildings stack up on each other. That was, I would say, essential to figuring out what the style would look like, because that was literally what you would be seeing, I would say, at least 80% of the time. I think like one of the ways that I found to make it cozy was to bring back the texture of paper, because that's kind of what the style is based on, like woodblock painting, watercolors and stuff like that. That feeling of nostalgia, that paper, that kind of material that feels homey, that feels good, and the colors are never, like there's no true black in the game because we thought it was too much contrast. It's always like dark grays, dark blues, dark reds. It's about like balancing the colors and what people feel about those colors. Pastels are very comforting and easy on the eyes, but we also used contrast to our advantage. Like in Mickey and Bruce's house, it's all about like big and loud and contrast and reds and whites and very like blingy, but that is meant to represent their character.
Max, the person who wrote Bruce and Mickey, I remember when I was assigned their houses, he came to me and he was like, okay, listen, these dudes, just huge douche. Like, think McMansion, Jersey Shore, some gaudy New Jersey mansion. And I was like, I got you. I know where I'm going with this. Also, fun fact, the statues inside their house initially had little nipples, but we had to take them off. They told us, yeah, you only have to take away the nipples on the lady statues. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. I'm taking both nipples. Nobody gets nipples. We had to make the world of Spiritfarer a place where living felt nice, right? It was a pleasant place to inhabit, but it couldn't be like too joyful because it's also a place where sadness can live and where the player can experience those negative feelings.
If you go overboard, you kind of look like you're mocking the people who are feeling grief, and that's definitely not what we wanted to do. So I think a lot of it actually comes through, yes, the art that helps like the player feel comforted as soon as they get in without even having to do anything, but a lot of it goes through also gameplay, because the gameplay will not let you fail, and it will always kind of cradle you and be like, you'll be okay. Like, it's all right, you can try again, there's no problem.
Everyone was asking the question when we had the pitch, which is, okay, that sounds interesting, but how do you actually play this? What is it that you do in the game? One of the very first things I did when I joined the project was to draw the game on a board. I had the boat, I had encounters on the boat, I had you going on islands to basically recruit people, find them, bring them back on the boat, to do something with them that we didn't really know back then would be. And then at some point you get to bring them to some place, and that's where they leave the boat. That was the general loop of the game. And mixed in this was the concept of light farm simulation, basically. Tending to crops, watering plants, planting seeds, having a light management aspect of things growing up and expanding.
This weird project of a management platformer with narrative elements. A lot of things were still kind of murky, like the scale of the narrative elements of the game were very ill-defined.
The biggest thing that changed actually was that the spirits were not the one who mattered. You had a crew and you forged relations with the crew members, but the spirits are nameless, faceless. A bit like what you saw in Spirited Away, was one of the big inspirations. So in Spirited Away, you have that scene where you see ghost spirits getting out of the boat to enter the bathhouse. So there was those things that I changed pretty early on because I wanted to explore the relationship with people who were deceased and not you doing that as a job and you didn't care about who they were. Also, the idea of events and platforming around the ship and platforming on islands. It wasn't that much of a given that Spiritfarer would be a platformer, but considering that we had a very nice character that moved really well, having some platforming elements felt right for the game.
The platforming is really fun. It feels really great, and I was surprised by how great it felt. But then what do we do with that? We could have done a platformer management game, but that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted a more narrative-driven game. And then when you do that, you kind of have to dial down the platforming and the difficulty and the challenges. In the end product, there's almost no part of Spiritfarer where the platforming really is challenging, and it doesn't matter. The platforming is fun, it feels good, it enhances the experience in a kind of accessory way.
And then every concept of caring relationship, so understanding spirits' moods, hugging them. We had to make a specific animation for each of those hugging animation, for each of the hugging feature. So the concept of kindness was, slowly appearing in Spiritfarer more and more and more and more. You care for people, you care for things, you care for your crops. Anyway, I think Spiritfarer is long, probably very much longer than we anticipated as well. But that's in huge part due to the farm sim aspect. The time you need to explore places, to transform resources, to gather resources. I think the mundane aspect of things and the chores aspect is kind of how farm sims handle things. When you play Stardew Valley or Harvest Moon or even to a degree Animal Crossing, you do have to repeat the same things over again. It puts you in a position of repetition that is comforting in a way. But the mundaneness of it is also, contrasted by the whimsy of the world. Like the world is really conceptually complicated. You do encounter weird creatures and you have fantastical events. So the coziness comes from the fact that everything you see, and even to a degree everything you can do, is quite relatable. But then the outcome of it could be fantastical.
It's so many disparate elements that can be arranged in so many different ways. One of the most complex and scary part of this balancing process was that the core of the game is one of management. That's the core gameplay loop. You accumulate resources and you spend them to progress through the story. The core content of the game is the narrative content. So even if we had a whole loop, if we didn't work at all on the narrative element, you don't write a single line of dialogue. Well, you don't have any rewards to give, because the rewards of the management loop is narrative content.
Spiritfarer is not a game for everyone. And to a degree, there are some moments that many players can feel are a bit of a drag, a bit long, the loops take time to kick in. In a way, the fact that the chores are kind of repetitive is the point. Some players are bored, and I get it, but if you take the time to accept this, then you go into a state that is much more an acceptance to the message.
It required a lot of fine-tuning afterwards, but we were really relieved when we realized that, the game worked. The concepts, the wager worked.
I had a couple of concerns. We seemed to be enjoying what we had set forth because of the inside testings, but we weren't sure how exactly the mass amount of people would end up receiving it, and if they would be receiving it positively or negatively, and how they would end up coping with what's going on inside the game. So that was one of our main worries.
I wasn't sure people were going to get it. As a game, if I had to explain it to someone, I had a hard time. The elevator pitch that we eventually came up with, that it was a cozy management game about dying. If you tell that to someone, it's not like, oh yeah, I get what that game is, I see exactly what it is, and I'll have no problem buying that game. So we have a side-scrolling sort of platformy game, which is a management game, but which has heavy narrative elements, and it's cozy and it's going to make you feel things. You sort of hope that you're going to be able to communicate it. You're going to hope that they're going to understand it, and then once they've understood it, you're going to hope that they're going to be like, yeah, I'd play that. You have to lead with something when you're first announcing it. You can't tell everybody everything about your game and hope that they get it all. You dumb it down or you simplify it. Literally, and this is pretty rare, we had 2 trailers in the works. We had 2 trailers prepared that were fairly different. One of them was leaning hard on the sort of, learn to say goodbye aspect of it. It wasn't leaning very hard on the management, manage a boat aspect. And so we went with that. We sort of secured a deal with Microsoft to get announced during their big event during E3 2019.
E3 was a pretty special moment for us. We were extremely lucky to be selected by Microsoft ID to be there on the big stage right after Keanu Reeves. It even became a meme, the fact that someone shouted at Keanu Reeves on stage for Cyberpunk 2077.
Is really going to be breathtaking.
Breathtaking.
You're breathtaking!
It was like, what the hell is happening? It's just completely crazy. There was Keanu Reeves on stage with us, and then a minute later, bam, Spiritfarer. And we didn't know. Microsoft didn't tell us when. It was meant to be contrasting, and they did their job pretty well. I was floored. It was something that is beyond words of, it's hard to describe the feeling you get when you see the game that no one knew about, that you've been working on for years, happening there at that moment. It was extremely crazy.
Wait, what is that game? Yeah, it was super cool to see Keanu, but there was this game. What is that game? And we were that game.
It was really awesome. It just blew up overnight to a certain extent, and we doubled and then tripled and quadrupled the amount of players that I was interacting with on a daily basis. So it kind of just blew my mind. And then when we ended up going to demonstrate our games and people actually had it in their hands, we had some people actually reflecting on what was going on in their lives and explaining to us on the show floor, this actually touched me quite a bit because of XYZ. And that's when it kind of clicked in my mind, oh, we actually have something that everyone can, to a certain extent, relate to.
So another person came up to play the game, and this was, I guess within the first dozen people outside of the studio that had actually played the demo of the game. And this person playing our demo was legitimately brought to tears by it. My immediate reaction was being taken aback that in this sort of crowded space of a bunch of strangers in this sort of neon lit with lasers sort of space, we were literally next to Doom Eternal. There were 4 screens of Doom Eternal and then us. And this person just sort of sits down and plays 15 minutes of our demo and is brought to tears by it. I just found it beautiful.
It's very corporate and it's very public, so usually people have their guard up when they go in to play your games, and you expect that. You don't expect a 100% impression, because people are more comfortable at home and they will be more at ease to let themselves experience stuff. But that actually I think that's when I went oh okay, we gotta work hard. Okay, let's go back. we gotta make sure that we do this right.
Everything about that was surreal. And, to be clear, not nobody else who played the demo that day cried, but one person did. And it's this is why you're in gaming. You want to like have a legitimate like experience and sort of share that experience with other people. Long after I've departed this industry or whatever, that'll probably stay with me. I guess we had a constant sort of barometer of how people might be connecting to our project throughout as soon as we announced it and up to launch, because we constituted a solid community around this that just grew over time. The main focus of how we wanted to engage with the community is like, okay, we're gonna have a mailing list, and instead of having like that boring mailing list where you just sort of send out like, here's a new GIF or whatever, it was more like, okay, so here's a little about the game. Now you respond to this and we'll have a conversation. Invariably, compared to what you would have on a Twitter or Discord or whatever, it's like people would treat this a little more like you're being pen pals, right? So you have individuals in the community just reaching out as a response to like a fairly low emotion newsletter with like a very emotionally raw sort of message, right?
People really got attached quickly to these characters, and people were just sharing those intimate stories. Everyone was really grateful that we were creating this game, and they learned a lot through their own loss and their own grief. And some that didn't even ever saw grief in their life were really grateful, knowing that at some point someone in their life might eventually pass on.
There's like an immense privilege of working on a game where people feel that vulnerable. And not only that, they're gonna open up to what is basically a stranger and say like, okay, I feel safe enough with you to describe, here's the pain I'm going through. And if ever it gets heavy, obviously we encourage people to seek professional help and that sort of stuff. But some of it is just like, I just need to get this off my chest. The dev team was sort of being a little vulnerable about putting this out in the world and putting so much of themselves into it. So to have that reflected in the player and have the players sort of reach out and say like, yeah, same, very powerful for all of us.
At that point, it was just a huge sigh of relief that initial vision was kind of, correct. You're going to connect to the spirits. You're going to feel something when they leave, when you bring them to the Everdoor. At that point, I was like, okay, yeah, this is going to work. But then followed kind of the craziest 7 months of the game's production.
Worldwide this morning, growing concern over a growing health crisis.
The coronavirus forcing millions more Americans into virtual lockdown.
12 new countries have reported their first cases.
The number of people affected by the virus around the globe keeps climbing.
We are marshaling the full power of the federal government and the private sector to protect the American people.
This is a potentially very serious public health threat. This is a constantly changing situation.
I must give the people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
We went remote in March 2020. So the whole end of production for Spiritfarer was done remotely. Yeah, I'd say the impact of the pandemic was obviously very big in terms of teamwork, for sure. If you look at sports teams practice together, right? You can't pass the puck to someone if you're not in the same room as them, right? Or not as easily anyways. Those happy accidents that happen when you go to the coffee machine and you bump into someone and you're mulling through a problem in your head and then something, lights up a spark and it inspires you. It depends also though on where you're at in production. Anyways, in our experience and from what we've seen over the last year is that, if you're, super focused on shipping the game and you unfortunately have to do some overtime, well, doing that at home was way better actually, because, you're cutting down on travel time, you're less worried about certain things, you're already in that focus to ship the game, and then that focus helps. I'd say one thing that I've been talking to over the last year now is that just how lucky we are to be making games. How lucky we are to be a technology-driven business, because for us going remote, we were already using Discord, we're already using all these communications and all that. I think everyone would have preferred not to have been in this situation, obviously. But in that sense, we're very fortunate to be making games.
It's extremely weird, the world shutting down around us and us starting to hunker down in our homes and with our relatives and or just by ourselves. So it was tough to pick the game. And I was really, really afraid that the game would be actually received negatively because of this. I mean, oh no, not another game about death when we are so much surrounded by it and by the dread of it.
We were very much head down, trying to get the best game possible done and trying to release it when we could release it. We didn't have the luxury to take this thing that we had worked on for 3 years and say, well, now's not the time. On a more human side, it's like we presumed and assumed that this would be a good time for it. Like, not in a capitalistic sense, but more in the sense that people needed sort of like a hug. We had seen, obviously, something like Animal Crossing do extremely well and be received like an escape from what were terrible times for everybody. It didn't feel like there was any way you could read this project as profiting from like the situation. Like it hadn't been created in that mindset. We never shied away from it in the way that we communicated the game. Like, we were upfront. It was like, it's about dying. It is. Like, if you wanted to just play it as an easy sort of romp, well, sorry, you eventually that story has to end.
We were at a point where it's kind of the point of no return, where it's too late to cut content. You need to ship and you need to hit certain, marketing opportunities. Plus, at the end of 2020, we knew that next-gen consoles were coming out, so we wanted to make sure that we were launching before next-gen came out, just to make sure that we weren't old news, old generation release at that point. It was a kind of a wild ride there. On top of being, in remote, that was a huge challenge, but an incredible accomplishment for us.
Spiritfarer has so much richness and depth.
Spiritfarer, simply put, is one of my favorite indie games.
It's a good game that becomes great over time.
I think it's fantastic, and I recommend it to literally anyone.
Tons of very, very flattering reviews, and I was floored by the amount of praise we got. We've received so many letters from people, telling us, thank you for what you did. And yet I feel like I didn't do anything for them. I was just like telling stories of people dying. I didn't have that intent of being a lesson at all.
We had a lot of letters coming in, and I would say, I think I cried at every one of them. So many of them were just so genuine and so thankful and so happy they had found something they resonated with and a topic that is hard and often you're not very encouraged to talk about. I don't know, to be able to touch so many people is something that I never thought would happen, I guess, not in this way.
I guess that's what I was hoping for, right? I don't know if it surprised me so much as it made me happy, right? It was like, we really were hoping to provide the catharsis and also like this feeling that someone else gets it, that someone else has been through it and you're not the only one. I think what scared us the most was that it would come across as like generic platitudes, like the kind of things that you would find in a "I'm sorry for your loss" greeting card or something. It was important to us to feel like it was authentic and that it came from a real place.
One of the most touching letters we received was a letter from a nurse in the US, and she was basically writing to us that she had given up hope on her work, which is a very, very tough work. Being a nurse is an incredibly ungrateful job. It's really hard. And she played Spiritfarer, and thanks to the game, she took back her mantle of being a nurse. I thought it was really cool to read. Completely not expected. I mean, you don't expect when you make a game to have people expressing such a strong impact in their own daily lives and who they are. Many people wrote to us because they found like through the game they could, in a way, say goodbye to that weird lion character they don't know, and mimicking that to the feeling they had of not being able to say goodbye to their grandfather who passed away because of COVID.
For a lot of people, they would like relate to a specific character that would remind them of a loved one that they had lost. We have an elderly character, Alice the Hedgehog, that struggles with dementia at the end there, and it's pretty heavy, but a lot of people have experienced something similar.
There was this one woman, I think from what I remember, she had been through a cancer herself, and Summer's story really resonated with her. She felt like the game really captured what it's like to battle a disease that is so all-encompassing and how terrifying it is. She sent us a really, really touching letter, and she told us at the end, I think if I was a spirit, I would be this bear, right? A little bit like mangled, but still there, resilient.
A lot of their subject matters were really just directed to the void, as in they never really expected a message from my end. It's really just being thankful that we were able to create such a project that dealt with such topics so that they could grow themselves as well as reminisce as to what was going on in their lives. We were a good ear to listen to what happened in their lives and the stories they wanted to share. So it just went hand in hand perfectly.
One of the difficult parts of the feedback was around Gustav's quest, which admittedly was kind of rushed at some point. I think I did a bad job of really framing the character and explaining well his feelings toward his own disabilities. When I wrote up about his disabilities, I took a lot of inspiration from my own experiences with epilepsy. And then some very smart person kind of called us out on Twitter in a way that initially I felt was kind of unfair to us. But then I cooled down a bit and realized, I didn't act with as much respect as I thought I had. I kind of got too self-absorbed. And I've hurt someone. I have this responsibility as a creator to acknowledge the pain that I deal with others as well. Because, I can connect with others with pain, but I can also hurt them. I'm really happy with how, as a studio, we handled that. We made some public acknowledgement of the problems in Spiritfarer's writing. We apologized publicly. And we went straight ahead to writing a new version that would be able to more respectfully express what I was trying to express. We do have a blind spot there. We don't know what the disabled community thinks, and we shouldn't think for them. We had this very cool cooperation with an organization called Able Gamers. I've learned a lot about how people feel, how the disabled community feels towards disability, but also towards ability and towards the prejudice that they suffer. It was kind of painful to admit that I've hurt someone, but all in all, it was a great experience, and I'm happy to have went through it.
As much for the dev team as for, very vocally some of our fans, it did help. It did help to be encouraged to think about these people and think about what has been lost and what was, I guess, retained. There were many, many ways of people taking this game, right? A lot of people were like, this is tough. This is making me cry, sort of thing. To be honest, some people just turned it off, which is totally cool. There was something, kind of beautiful about people who proudly proclaims that they've been brought to tears by a game. It seemed like a net positive for everybody, and those who didn't agree were just like, yeah, this isn't for me, or no, this is too real, or I'm not ready. There is probably something about the game that says that it's okay. It's okay. If you don't want to go on this adventure, that's fine.
The first day of E3, Yahtzee came, so he sat down, and we had a speech with it because the game was barely playable by itself. We had to explain what it was about, and because we were playing a tiny fraction of it that wasn't really representative of what the whole game was about. And then he sat down and he didn't say anything. So I came back to him and said, "You want me to explain?" And he just barely looked at me and said, "No." Fine, okay, sure, so you play the game. But he played for a very long time. He played the whole demo. He didn't say anything living. Many people are very, polite at E3 at very least. I mean, the developers out there, you're not gonna, hey, dude, your game sucks. They don't say that to anyone. So you just sit up, stand up, and you say, "Thank you very much for your time. It was nothing to play," and then you live in real life and go test something else. So he didn't say anything, not one word. He just stood up and left. I was like, oh my god, what? I think he hated the game. Who was that guy? And then someone told me, yeah, I think that's Ben Croshaw. It's like, what, really? Like Yahtzee? Yeah. It's like, wow. Yeah, okay, that makes total sense. I mean, honestly, when you're him and when you've been that honest, bluntly honest with people for that many years, I don't think you go to E3, wearing your Yahtzee badge, because many developers will look sideways at you. You know, he don't want to be punched in the face by some, dev who's been working their ass off for years. So I was expecting his review, and when he said things that were exactly what we wanted the people to feel.
And of course, that lovely house you built for Dennis the Slug stands empty on your boat for the rest of the game, and by the end your ship is struggling to stay afloat under the weight of countless 2-story tombstones, just as our souls are burdened with the memories of times past, both good and bad, until the day we let it go. Metaphors!
It was such an awesome review. I mean, because you expect so little of it, you think, okay, he's gonna see all the problems, and there are many problems to me in the game. I can tell you that not one developer who ships a game thinks their game is perfect, not one. We all see only problems, from bugs to things we could have done better, from things we had to cut down because of time, from things we had to change because it couldn't fit. Anyway, we only see an ocean of problems. And yet he saw in the game something that we really hope people would saw. And it was awesome. It was honestly the best review.
In this numb, unsympathetic world, anything that makes me feel something is worth celebrating. That's why I don't take the price tags off my underpants.
We make video games, right? That's what we do. We're not curing cancer. We're not doing that. But for me, it's really important, that our games have a little bit of a positive impact on a lot of people. And that's really the goal. My wife is a psychologist, and she has, a very big impact on a smaller number of people. So if we can kind of bring that with our games and have a positive impact on our fans' lives, it's incredibly sustaining and gratifying. And I think for us anyways, one of the most important things we could do as game developers.
Spiritfarer is the game that is the most personal, the game that is the closest to me, yet the one that I feel is the most shared with others. It's a very satisfying feeling because you feel like what you're doing is not entirely yours, but you get to share with people who think like you in a way, and you are in control of it, even if it's a bit frightening at times. For me, what's important in the game is to have a takeaway from it. You play the game and then something should resonate with you not just as a player, but as a human being. That level of interaction with the virtual world, how you engage with that world, makes you feel emotions in a different level than watching a movie or reading a book. What we try to do at the company and what we try to do in the studio is to make something that really counts. And from Jotun to Sundered to Spiritfarer, you get to see that line. So whatever we do next, it will still be exactly this. It will still be a game that players can take away something from it. Players can think of the experience they had and reflect upon something. Games are an art form, and we can express things through games that only games can express. Games are something much more than many people give it credit for.